Welcome back. It's a privilege. We are just absolutely packed with great talent tonight, and I have the privilege of working with this next guy in the main room a lot. He works all over the world, headliner everywhere. Got a new album coming out.
It's out.
It's out.
It's out.
We're all out. Ladies
Around
and
the
gentlemen,
world.
give it up for Tom Rhodes, ladies and gentlemen.
Yay! Argus.
Before we do it, what's the name of the album?
Around the world. I recorded it in 24 cities around the world. It starts in Paris, ends in Jerusalem. It's all mostly jokes and stories about each place. It's the result of me doing the international circuits for 20 years. There's a Dublin track, there's a Galway track,
Yeah, we
Belfast,
have a comedian
Mongolia,
column here.
Tel Aviv, everywhere. Berlin, Tokyo.
And so about how many minutes will you do off of each location that comprises the special?
Well, like there's 3 Paris tracks, so it depends. They're usually 3 to 5 minutes long.
Right.
Yeah.
So are you kind of glad you're not international traveling now with this, coronavirus going on?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was in Las Vegas last week, and I was playing at the Tropicana.
Yeah.
And I was saying, is it racist to hold your breath on an elevator with Chinese people now? Because I'm staying on the 16th floor. I thought I was going to pass out on the way down here tonight. I was on the 9th floor getting dizzy.
Yeah, they're kind of split between the whales that bring in all the money and the disease they might have.
Yeah, and then they just came. Well, you mentioned the whales in your monologue, and I'm from Orlando, where we have SeaWorld.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I've always thought beached whales were just entertainers trying to get to SeaWorld. Give me an agent, quick. But
That's their open mic night.
They want to rename the coronavirus today. They came out with some scientific name, but.
Really?
Coronavirus is, it's the only disease that goes great with a little slice of lime.
That's
so hacky.
Yeah. Well, it made we all came up with the same jokes the first 3 days. All of us did,
But you mentioned Harvey Weinstein. Did you see the woman that testified this week said that he came out of the shower, he has lots of scars, and she said that he has a vagina. Did you see that?
Yeah.
And I just wonder if Gwyneth Paltrow is going to come out with a scent of that.
Ode to Harvey. Oh my God.
And I love watching you at the Comedy Store. You're just such a brilliant joke writer, and I just want to say before this goes any further, I love you with all my heart.
Oh, thank you, Tom. And don't let this crowd tonight be any measure. No, we had fun, and I love making people laugh. I love connecting with audiences just like you do. And that's the only place I can feel I can love and be loved in equal amounts.
Well, you crush it so great on the topical jokes. And, I miss Johnny Carson like a dead relative.
Yeah.
I grew up watching Carson, and, you remind me of that. But I think you're even better than Carson because a lot of your jokes, you have a better hit frequency than he did.
Well,
he always liked to mock the moment of him.
Well, when you and
a flat joke.
When I was watching him when I was really into him in the '60s, he was more with his own generation, okay? And so he was a lot more knocked down, drag out funny because he's the one who introduced Las Vegas backstage slang to America with his panel. And so with his peers, he was hilarious, and he would be guest Joey Bishop for the Rat Pack when Joey couldn't make it. Johnny was in that group.
There was a Life magazine expose on him, and he was on the cover in the '60s in that period when the show was still done in New York. And the journalist was with him. He was in Dallas, and he died on his ass. Yeah. They thought he was really edgy. So, for Middle America, his stand-up routine that he.
I remember that article.
They thought he was like Lenny Bruce.
He had stayed in Dallas, but he had to fly to Lubbock for the gig in a big basketball arena, and they scheduled it on the same afternoon as a Texas Tech football game. And Carson's from Nebraska. He couldn't believe it. He was furious. And he went out there with his hip, marijuana jokes in West Texas in 1967 and died the death of a dog. Yeah, wow. But he's my hero, and I'm glad he's yours too.
You did Carson many times?
Oh
right?
yeah. And it was technically very difficult. We've got
Did you ever get to party with him?
No, he took a different approach to me. He acted like he didn't party around me, and he got together with my father and with Mitzi to make sure I finally got well. They gave me no option but to get well in '86. the three of them. But Johnny wouldn't give me the Tonight Show. Mitzi wouldn't let me be on the Comedy Store. My dad wouldn't bankroll me anymore. And I think it was the third one that convinced me to get one. I'd have found a stage somewhere. But Dad's forever, you know. The Anglo-Saxon thing. But tell me, you had an interesting gig. I'd like our audience to know about when you left after your NBC sitcom. Mr. Rhodes?
Mr. Rhodes.
Okay.
96 to 97, NBC, baby. Yeah.
Okay. You went to Amsterdam. Tell us what you did in Amsterdam. This is so interesting.
Well, after the sitcom finished, you know, I had lived in New York City when I was 20 years old, like a dog. I'm from Florida. I moved there to be a comedian, and I wasn't good enough yet. So it sucked, and that was 1987, and I always swore if I ever had any money, I'd live in New York City with style.
Yeah.
So when my sitcom finished, I had a truckload of money. I moved back to New York City, got a rock star apartment in the Wall Street area. And it was great. I was doing all the New York clubs, but also I'm good friends with Rich Hall, who was in with London, and he told me you should come to London. So I started, you know, I had all this cash, so I'm like, you know, going New York to London, and I got in with London, started playing there a lot, and that led to gigs around Europe and then the rest of the world. I played in Amsterdam, fell in love with a Dutch woman, moved to Amsterdam. We were together for 2 years, still constantly traveling, and I was partying like an animal. And the relationship ended, and I was just about to move back to the United States when these people from this Dutch television network saw me performing at the best comedy club in Amsterdam called Toomler, which is a Jewish Yiddish word for traveling merrymaker. Brilliant name.
That's how Sammy Shore started.
He was
they call him a tumbler in those Jewish resorts.
Yeah.
In the Wisconsin Dells and in
because they had jokes and funny stories. They would travel around to the Jewish ghettos in Europe.
They would work the swimming pools in the afternoon, and then they would work on stage at night. It was just doing all. Jerry Lewis was supposed to be one of the world's best when he was a kid. But anyway, that was
they were looking for an American to host a late night talk show, and they had the audition at Toomler. And I had just gotten back from Hong Kong where I had like some suits tailor-made. All the other comedians showed up wearing jeans and T-shirts. I think one of the reasons why I got it was I looked like a television host. Right. But also I had a great set, and I was funny, and I had lived there
in English.
Yeah, and I had lived there for a couple years, so I had some great observations on Amsterdam. All the other English-speaking auditionees had flown in for it. So I got to host my own late night talk show on Dutch television for 2 years.
2 years.
And it was called Kevin Masters Late Night. Unfortunately, they named the person before they found the person. I fought it.
You went as Kevin Masters?
I never answered to Kevin. And if anyone would call me Kevin, I'd say my name's Tom. Yeah. I never went along with it. And
this is weird.
Every magazine and newspaper interview, they would say, "Who's Kevin? Why is it called Kevin?" It only confused people. But you know, when I fought it, and I said my name is really important to me, and you know, I've worked my whole career to build up, you know, a reputation for my name, and they go, "Well, we'll get another person." I go, "Okay, I'm Kevin Masters." So
someone who will agree to be Kevin Masters.
It was the greatest experience of my life.
When you're in Northern Europe, they insist on masters, you know.
A big part of the show was I was a foreigner experiencing Dutch culture.
Yeah.
So every episode there'd be a 5-minute film where I would get to, like one day I spent with a Dutch farmer, and I walked into an electric fence. He said in Dutch, you know, I'm wearing the wooden shoes and I'm helping him around the farm, and he says in Dutch, "Look out for the electric fence," but I don't speak Dutch, so you know, I got electrocuted. It's on film. They thought it was hilarious. I got to cover the Prime Minister debates with a press badge, be down there and ask questions after their debate.
In English?
In English. Yeah. I got a tour of the gay nightlife scene of Amsterdam by the guy who does the gay parade, which is a boat parade on the canals. A right-wing politician who owned a coffee shop where they sell marijuana. He was a Christian right-wing stoner. Gave me a tour of he explained the drug laws to me. How tolerant they are. So like a former prostitute gave me who does social work.
Took you around the world.
Took me around the red light district explained to me how they pay taxes and get their health care. Like every aspect of Dutch society
And they
was,
put them in
was
windows,
explained
right?
to me.
The prostitutes stand in windows like live mannequins, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can just hug them. So and then all the Dutch celebrities came on and they would be interviewed, and they had the first season they had the word of the day. They would try and teach me a Dutch word, and the audience would explain how to say it and what it meant. And Dutch people are very stoic and they're hard to get to know.
Yeah.
And it was like I had a magic passport on the Netherlands.
Right.
Like everybody knew who I was wherever I went. Like people would say, I'd go into a store and someone would say, Polder Model. That's the Dutch way of coming up with social programs. And that's your word of the day. And I'm just trying to buy a pack of cigarettes, And they would teach me things. So,
Well, I know this.
I was single. I was partying my brains out. I was doing ecstasy, dancing in clubs, and it was the greatest experience of my life. And I'm riding a bicycle around the city, and I adore Amsterdam and Dutch people, and it was pretty awesome. And if that was not fortuitous enough, when that ended, the same network let me be a presenter on a travel show.
Yeah.
So I got to do a highlight on St. Petersburg, Russia, Peru, Champagne region of France.
Based in Amsterdam, going around.
Yeah. Getting to be a Dutch explorer.
Well, did you get a sense of their history of just what a remarkable trading people they were? I mean, they were the tradesmen of the world until the British surpassed them in the late 1600s.
Yeah, no, and they have a long tradition of accepting people from war-torn countries, and they worship business, and the Dutch invented the stock exchange in Amsterdam. And then they had the first collapse of the bubble market, the tulips. Yeah. But the Dutch allowed the Jews that were being persecuted by Isabella and Ferdinand during the Inquisition in Spain come to Amsterdam.
That's right.
When Jews were being persecuted around Europe.
To keep the French out, this is really interesting. What they did, this is how freedom of speech really started in Amsterdam, because they would get the law lords to put everybody's Bibles in their own individual languages, which would get over to England and all this stuff. But to keep the French, the French out, the reason the France never overran Holland and was able to conquer and get rid of all these printing presses was that the French would flood the Dial and drown the French cavalry, drown the French infantry, and they wouldn't be able to get to Amsterdam. And the only one to figure it out was Napoleon.
I was going to say, I'm reading a biography on Napoleon.
So he bluffed it in December.
I was about to correct you, but Napoleon took it.
He bluffed an attack. They flooded the Dial, but it was December, and it froze over, and he marched across and conquered Amsterdam. That's why he's called Napoleon.
I read Genghis Khan's biography.
Oh, yeah.
And the Mongolians loved winter because they could roll over the lakes and the moats, and also their arrows were more crisp. So like in summer they would take a break and they'd fatten the horses and just camp for the summer.
Like TV series.
But they loved it for the fact that they could roll over the frozen rivers and stuff.
You must have learned a ton.
Yeah.
So tell me what's going on with you now. What are you?
I came out with the album Around the World. Very proud of it. It took me 2 years to record it in all these different cities. It kind of cost me my marriage being gone that long. But now I'm almost finished with a book about my best stories traveling the world. Almost drowning in Thailand, having my own late night talk show in Amsterdam.
By Kevin Masters.
Yeah, I did a tour of Israel, December 2018, and I flew over a week early and brought my 80-year-old Jesus freak mother to Jerusalem.
Oh my!
Yeah, so
that's a brownie point there.
Yeah, if I wasn't the favorite child before, I think I got it locked up.
Okay, so now you've got the book coming out, you've got the album out. One last thing, I want you to plug your podcast.
Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. I talk about books that I read. Mm-hmm. I've done a 3-part thing on the French Revolution. I've done every kind of comedian, Bill Burr, Mark Maron. I've been doing the podcast for like 10 years. So
wow.
There's a lot.
I look forward to doing
a lot of different episodes. I'm a Voltaire freak. There's a Voltaire episode. I'm going to do a Napoleon episode when I finish with the book. But I try and enrich the world with wisdom and laughter.
Well, you do it, and it is a pleasure murdering crowds with you here in the main room on weekends. You're fantastic, Tom. If you have a chance, you Comedy Store fans, get here on weekends and catch Tom Rhodes. He's the best.
Thanks, Argus. You're one of my heroes. I love you.
Thank you. Tom Rhodes, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, buddy. Fantastic. Really. We'll get our picture taken. Is Lucas here?